A question I pretty much never thought about when I was in the LDS Church, but which I've heard a lot since moving on from it, is this. Is Mormonism, and specifically the LDS Church, a cult? For the decades that I was an all-in member of the LDS Church, I was blissfully ignorant of the whole cult discussion. I was happily asleep in my pew every Sunday, listening to the monotonous messages, singing the songs, and generally just drinking the Kool-Aid. It seems strange in hindsight that I was that naive. But then again, maybe it doesn't, because I really took to heart the teachings of the leaders to avoid all anti-Mormon media like the plague. In my case, it really worked. Now, since leaving the LDS Church and yet still believing in the Book of Mormon, I see the cult conversations about the LDS Church everywhere. From ex-Mormon Reddit to Joe Rogan, from YouTubers to Protestant Christian pastors. It's hard to miss. Growing up, I associated cults with Jonestown and Waco and even Halley's Comet. Those cults seemed full of weirdos who were always killing themselves or else getting killed. Their people sounded like they were either deranged or on the low end of the intelligence spectrum. But recently I have learned a lot more about cults, and even got to know a new friend who is highly intelligent, deeply religious, and who just escaped from a cult. His story, along with others, has prompted me to start asking questions like, how did he not know he was in a cult? And, was I also in a cult? To find the answers, I think it's important for me first to ask, what exactly is a cult? I asked ChatGPT for a definition, and this is what it said. It said, a cult is an organization that systematically seeks to manipulate, control, and exploit its members through psychological, social, and sometimes physical means, often isolating them from outside support or alternative viewpoints. Next, I looked at Stephen Hassan's BITE model of cults for an even deeper definition. Stephen lists 4 main traits of a cult-like organization. First, they exercise behavior control, restricting personal freedom, rigid rules, and punishments for violators. Second, they exercise information control, limiting the access to external or critical sources, promoting internal materials exclusively. Third, they exercise thought control, encouraging black and white thinking, discouraging questioning or criticism. And fourth, they exercise emotional control. They use fear, guilt, shame, and love bombing to manipulate emotions and allegiance. In thinking about these definitions, Stephen Hassan's and ChatGPT's, it kind of felt like I was looking into a mirror I wasn't quite ready for. But I decided to go ahead anyway, and I asked ChatGPT a straightforward question. I said, can you think of examples of how the LDS Church acts in a cult-like way? And these are some of the examples it gave. It said, number 1, LDS behavior control. It has rigorous expectations. Members are expected to conform strictly to certain behavior codes like the word of wisdom, dress standards, garment wearing, church attendance, Sabbath observance, etc. It focuses on monitoring and accountability. It practices such as regular bishop interviews, worthiness checks, and frequent reporting. They can create an atmosphere of surveillance and pressure to comply. And third, it promotes a strong obedience culture. Teachings frequently emphasize obedience as a virtue, often equating it directly with spirituality and worthiness. Yeah, definitely. And then the second section, LDS information control. It encourages the limiting of external sources. Historically, members are discouraged from reading critical materials such as anti-Mormon literature. While this has relaxed slightly recently, there's still a strong culture of caution towards outside criticism. And personally, I think that ChatGPT is being overly generous here. LDS Church also presents only a selective history. The presentation of church history is often sanitized or selective, omitting or minimizing controversial topics such as polygamy details, translated methods of the Book of Mormon, or early church governance. And it has a centralized narrative control. The church maintains strict control over official teachings and materials, carefully curated through manuals, general conference talks, and official websites, discouraging alternate interpretations. Yeah, definitely. The third way the LDS Church is like a cult is in thought control. It teaches a follow-the-prophet mentality. Members are encouraged to defer judgment to church leaders, even over personal feelings or evidence. The phrase, when the prophet speaks, the debate is over, reflects this. It promotes binary thinking. Teachings often frame the world as strictly good versus evil and church versus the world, creating an us versus them mentality that discourages nuance and questioning. And it discourages expressions of doubt or criticism. Doubts or questions are often portrayed as signs of weakness, sin, or spiritual failure, making it difficult for genuine exploration or dialogue. Hello, this is my life in a nutshell. And 4, LDS emotional control. It utilizes guilt and shame. Messages about personal worthiness, sin, repentance, and obedience can frequently leverage feelings of shame, guilt, or inadequacy to encourage conformity. Definitely. It promotes conditional love and acceptance. Social acceptance and community support within LDS culture can often feel conditional upon conforming to church standards and beliefs. Those who leave or express doubt frequently experience strained relationships or social ostracism. ChatGPT, you are 100% on this. And it uses fear-based teaching. Narratives about eternal families, salvation, and afterlife consequences often create emotional fear or anxiety about noncompliance, leaving, or questioning church teachings. And I think this is the big one they hit us with. Get back in line or you're going to lose your eternal family. Okay. And 5, LDS institutional and structural control. It's based on hierarchy and authority. A strong hierarchical structure enforces strict authority from top leaders downward. Members have little or no direct influence on church policies or teachings. I would say no influence at all. It practices strict financial control. Members are strongly encouraged and often required, socially and religiously, to pay tithing as a condition for full participation in temple ceremonies and leadership roles, with limited transparency about how funds are managed. And I would say also to get baptized, you have to pay tithing. And it wields the temple recommend as a control tool. The requirement for a temple recommend based on interviews assessing obedience to church rules functions as a tangible tool for institutional control over behavior and belief. Yes, I can't get invited to my friends or my family's weddings anymore because I don't have that very important little card. So, this is what ChatGPT sees as an outside observer when it looks critically at the LDS Church's practices. And I have to say, wow. I'm pretty impressed with this list. But honestly, it's also a bit of a gut check for me. As someone who drank the LDS Kool-Aid my whole life, I'm shocked I didn't see these things before. What do you think? Is this list an accurate description of the LDS Church in your view? Based on these definitions, would you say the LDS Church is a cult, or maybe not? I have to acknowledge that everything in ChatGPT's list is something I've witnessed personally as a member of the LDS Church. Behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control, all under this strict church hierarchy. So it's kind of sad. It's sad that I didn't realize it, having been born into the church, and also really sad that so many of my loved ones who are all in still don't realize it. So again, I have to say, wow. But how about other cults? I mean, in thinking about these examples of cult behavior, I started wondering, are there other cults I might be part of and not realize it? I lived my whole life in the LDS Church, and if that's a cult and I didn't realize it, are there other ones around? So, is the LDS Church the only cult in town, or is this a larger problem? And so I started to think of institutions like the public education system, because that's where I've worked for most of my adult life. Or what about the military? Or what about law enforcement and the police? This is kind of a difficult subject to think about because I know so many amazing and good people, some of my friends and family, who work in each of these institutions, and I do too. And they provide so much good for our country by educating, protecting, etc. But I'm also dedicated to asking honest questions, which kind of gets me in trouble sometimes. But I want to know the truth no matter where the answers take me, as long as they are finding the truth. And so I asked ChatGPT. I said, something that occurs to me is that if I use these definitions about the LDS Church, the Bite model and your definition, I have a hard time seeing how other institutions that we commonly revere aren't also cults. For instance, the public education system looks very much like a cult sometimes. The military, the police. What is going on? And this is the answer I got from ChatGPT. It said, first, public education. Indeed, schools often exhibit aspects of the Bite model. Behavior control. Students must seek permission for basic personal actions, when to speak, stand, use the bathroom, what students wear, what they're allowed to say, where they are allowed to be at any given moment. They are often strictly regulated. That kind of hurt me really deeply because it is so true, every single one of those things. Information control. Textbooks and curricula are centrally chosen, limiting exposure to certain ideas or viewpoints, emphasizing particular narratives. Hello, yes. As an English teacher, we are often required to require our students to only use .edu or .gov sources for their papers. We don't want them looking anywhere else. Thought control. Schools most often encourage conformity rather than independent or critical thought. Success means the correct answers rather than insightful questions. That is 100% true. And it extends outside the classroom and also into the larger school system itself. Not only are students not allowed to think critically and ask questions, but teachers often aren't also. There's a very strict thought control that goes on in school districts. And emotional control. Teachers, and I would say administrators, often use praise, shame, comparison, and pressure to achieve compliance and performance. Can I just say COVID? Hello, 100% on. So this is pretty interesting. From kindergarten until now, I've spent the majority of my life involved in education, and yet I've never heard anyone question whether schools are cults before. But if they so clearly follow the Bite model, I wonder, why isn't everybody talking about this? It really makes me scratch my head. So next, ChatGPT said this about the military. Okay, military. The military is even more explicitly aligned with the Bite model. Behavior control, rigid schedules, required uniforms, mandatory compliance, detailed regulations, severe punishment for disobedience, and I would add, what happens if you walk away from the military? You go AWOL? They come looking for you with guns. Okay. Next, information control. Restricted access to outside or opposing narratives. Heavily internal propaganda to maintain morale and purpose. I've heard this from my friends in the military. Thought control. A strong emphasis on loyalty, obedience, hierarchy, and discouraging open dissent. And if what one of my friends says is true, they actually have to take oaths of loyalty, much like in the Book of Mormon. And emotional control. The use of camaraderie, pride, honor, shame, and fear to motivate or discipline soldiers. Definitely. So, holy cow. This is amazing. Again, I don't know of anyone who is talking about this, but there it is. It exactly follows Stephen Hassan's Bite model. So I wonder why no one is questioning how militaries are organized and run when they focus so heavily on control. Is military bad? I don't think so. But is there other ways we could organize it? 100% yes. Finally, ChatGPT had this to say about the police. Law enforcement agencies often share similar structures as the military: rigid behavioral standards, obedience to command, unity of thought, strong emotional incentives like heroism and brotherhood, the thin blue line, and severe repercussions for breaking ranks. Yep. So in the end, each of these comparisons really made me think and left me feeling a bit unsettled. It's hard to look at these institutions that I've always respected and I was taught to respect through such a critical lens, but it also feels honest and necessary and a bit freeing, kind of like the first time that I allowed myself to take an honest look at the LDS Church. And so it makes me question, could these examples just be the tip of an even much larger iceberg? And I thought about this idea and then I noticed something. Each of these organizations, the LDS Church, our current public ed system, our current military complex, even law enforcement, all have one central theme in common, and that is control. Control is at the core of everything each of these institutions does every day, not only with their own employees, but with students and the people they interact with. It's control. It's surprising and it's shocking to me to realize how deeply this pattern of control is woven into the very fabric of our society and in these institutions that we are taught to revere. So what do I mean by control? Let's define terms. I guess I think of control as exercising power, authority, or rule over others in a way that dominates or manipulates their emotions or their thoughts or their information access or their behavior. So let's look around. Who are people in our society who exercise control over others? Who has power or authority or is in a position to manipulate or dominate others? Who do you see? When I look around, I see such people and positions literally everywhere, all over, in government, in religion, in education, in the workplace, and even inside our own families. I see them everywhere that one person comes to believe in their heart that they are above another person, either in rank or position or authority or power of any kind. From the president to the pastor, from the boss to the principal, from the parent to the husband. Basically, I think that anyone who chooses to believe that they get to control or manipulate either the behavior, the information, thoughts, the speech, or the emotions of anybody else seems to me to be like someone who exercises control. And so that begs the question, how did we come to believe that these cult-like behaviors of control are okay when we call ourselves a Christian nation? Because in direct contrast to people and institutions that become cult-like in their desire to control others, it feels like there is one person who consistently teaches the importance of our freedom over everything else, and that person is Jesus Christ. Thanks to Christ's redemption, quote, men are free according to the flesh, and all things are given unto them which are expedient unto man, and they are free to choose liberty and eternal life through the mediation of all men, or to choose captivity and death according to the captivity and power of the devil. Christ came, as Lehi prophesied, to bring us, quote, out of darkness unto light, yea, out of hidden darkness and out of captivity unto freedom. So because freedom is the most important gift of all, it seems to me like this is the most important thing that Christ wants to give each of us, and what he wants us to give each other. He said, neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ, but he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. That is like, it almost feels like this verse never existed, because not a single person that I know of in the entire world acts like it exists or that Christ ever said it. Where is a single person who wants to be great, who instead acts as a servant? Not like a pretend servant, like, oh, I'm in public service, oh, I feel so humble to be your president. But I mean somebody who's actually serving. Okay, next, Christ also said, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. When Christ established his Zion on earth, found in 4th Nephi, Mormon describes it as a people who, quote, had all things common among them. Therefore, there were not rich and poor. I thought that's interesting. He doesn't say there's not poor. He says also there's not rich. There's not rich and poor, bond and free, but they all were made free and partakers of the heavenly gift. And Moroni says that we Gentiles could someday have this freedom also, if we will establish Zion. And that's a huge if. He says this is a choice land, and whatsoever nation shall possess it shall be free from bondage and from a captivity and from all other nations under heaven, if they will but serve the God of this land, who is Jesus Christ, who hath been made manifest by these things which have been written. So this is something that I actually look forward to. I hope for the day when we'll begin to serve the Jesus Christ in the Book of Mormon, a Christ of equality and humility instead of our current Gentile God of control, our all-powerful God of authorities and ranks and rules and hierarchies. I think if we ever do, then we will finally be able to escape the cults that are woven into the fabric of our society. So what can I do in the meantime? If there are these people and institutions all around us that exhibit cult-like behavior, and maybe I even do some of these things myself, and exert control over others, and Zion's not here, what can I do in the meantime? And I was thinking about this today. I don't think I can change how these institutions work. I don't believe in marching in the streets or protesting. I don't think that's going to do anything. So why even bother? And I jotted down this thought. I said, even if we aren't able to ever change how things are in the world right now, I can still dream. I can still talk. I can still hope. And I can try to improve my tiny little corner of the world. I work in the education system, and in my classroom, I can focus on creating an environment that is based on individual freedom, equality, and love. I can focus on not taking part in controlling my students' behaviors, thoughts, emotions, or information. It's tough, but I can make a conscious effort. I live in a house with my wife and children, and there I can focus on creating a home that is based on individual freedom, equality, and love. Not the fake love and equality taught by the LDS Church, which teaches men to rule over women and parents to rule over their children. I'm talking about an eternal equality, a true love, a love that says, you're just as valuable as I am, and I will treat you as my equal, not as my inferior. I want my home to be one where I don't control the behaviors and the thoughts and the emotions and the information sources of my wife and children. And I live in a larger community where even if I don't have the ability to change anything, I can speak. My voice isn't any more important than anybody else's, I know that. But it is one voice, and I want to speak against the cults of control. I want to point out the true Christ of freedom. And how about you? I'd love to know if you have any ideas that help us find this freedom. All right, epilogue. I sat down and tried to write these thoughts into a poem, and something that would help me remember all the ideas I had as I made this video. Feel free to turn this off now if poetry isn't your thing, and I totally understand. But if you want to hear the poem, this is what I wrote. Even if. Why should I help to change this world of steel if no one seems to want more freedom too? Why should I dream or share a new ideal when I'm the only one who sees this view? Why should I build a city on a hill when no one wants to move from old to new? Why should I write something that makes me feel if you're not there for me to read it to? But then, so what if all my work is never known? Why shouldn't I walk this starlit path alone? I guess I'll write a book that makes me cry, even if it's only me that reads. I guess I'll build sandcastles in the sky, even if it's only me who sees. I guess I'll drift in wistful reverie, even if it's only me that dreams. What if the only life I change is mine? Well, then, at the end, at least I'll know I'm free.